Welcome into another digital edition of Daily Wager. I'm Doug Kazarian alongside Joe Fortenbaugh and Preston Johnson. The calendar has turned to July. Football just around the corner. We're breaking down third-year NFL quarterbacks. Third time's a charm, right? The third season for that class of 2018. We start with the MVP of last season, Lamar Jackson, courtesy of Caesars Sportsbook, a prop for the upcoming season. Passing and rushing touchdowns combined, 33 and a half. Had 43 last year, Joe, in that MVP campaign. Where are you going with this number?
This is a really big number. I think it's bigger than people realize. Just from a passing perspective, over the last 5 years, there are only 16 quarterbacks who have thrown for 34 or more touchdown passes in a season. Jackson's one of them. He did it last year. Now, thankfully, we get his legs and his ability to run the ball as well. And because of that, I am inclined to go over. Two key reasons here. Number one, Greg Roman, the offensive coordinator. This is going to be Jackson's second full year in Roman's system. So if he could do what he did last year in the first year in Roman's system, think about the progress he could make with another offseason heading into year two. In addition, look at his arsenal. Hollywood Brown is entering his second year as an NFL wide receiver. He had 7 touchdown receptions last year. Miles Boykin is entering his second year as an NFL wide receiver. He had 3 touchdown receptions last year. And you also have to realize the Ravens are a candidate to sign Antonio Brown. Not saying it happens, but if it does, this number is going to move. I'm inclined to play over 33 and a half here, Doug.
Other options for Jackson, including his passing yards and rushing yards, passing 3,200 yards essentially. And the rushing numbers come down a little bit, 935 and a half. Preston, I ask you as a guy who had the MVP ticket on Jackson a year ago, which one of these stands out to you?
So I hope you guys are right with the touchdowns, because especially through the air, I like the passing yards over again. Last year, it was one of the biggest discrepancies. We saw everyone likes to focus on the rushing yards because of his ability on the ground. But I absolutely love the passing. I still have this projected over 3,500 yards. And the thing is, well, what if he gets hurt? What if he gets injured? Yeah, that's baked into my projection. I have him playing 13 and a half games on average. So yes, if he gets injured for a long period of time, it's probably going to lose. But if he's healthy, I think this flies over. They talked about, the Ravens have said, hey, we're going to try to limit Lamar's rushing, at least the intentional rushes. And we're going to, trust now in his third season, his arm more. And then they backed it up and picked 2 guys in the draft at receiver. They're going to help. They stacked him even at running back to have weapons and speed around him. Last year, even in his first full season, he was 12th in the NFL in QBR on deep ball attempts, and he's just getting better, like Doug alluded to. I think this number, they're going to have plenty of opportunities because of their rushing threat, because of the speed around him to take deep shots. They're going to convert them. He's going to go over the 31.99 and a half. Again, I have this over 3,500.
So Jackson was the last of the 4 drafted the first round. How about the second to last? Josh Allen, his props at Caesars, 3,200, 1.5 passing yards, 6.5 rushing touchdowns. Guys, I'm on the under for his passing yards. It comes down to a few things. First, the defenses he's going to have to face. Last year, the defense in terms of passing rating allowed, 6 of the top 10 and 10 of the top 15. So those defenses, obviously there's some personnel that change, but a pretty tough lineup facing that. On top of that, this team just wants to run and rely on its defense. Obviously, he threw for 200 and change in a few games, but did go under this total last year. Also, when you factor in the weather, 5 of the 6 games the Bills have on their schedule after Thanksgiving are in cold weather cities. You just don't know what's going to happen. Also, what if, like some reports are suggesting, the season is delayed a few weeks? Then that's going to mean even more games that could have potential snow and wind and other tough conditions. I just think it's, all in all, this is not a team that wants to throw deep. He's not exactly the most accurate quarterback as well. So I'm going to go under here on the passing yards. Preston, what about you with the rushing yards? 6.5 for rushing touchdowns. He had 9 last year.
He did. And the year before that, he only played 12 games and he had 8. So why is this number only 6.5? I'll tell you, my projection is pretty much spot on with the odds makers. I'm 6.4. So you have to dive in here. What was Josh Allen doing these last 2 years to get all these touchdowns? We're trying to project and predict what those touchdowns may be going forward. And you look compared to, say, someone like Lamar Jackson, who had nearly twice as many rushing yards. He had 60 red zone rushing attempts compared to Josh Allen's 40. Yet Lamar Jackson only scored 7 touchdowns on the ground. Josh Allen had 9. So there's some metrics you can look at, kind of some underlying predictors of how many touchdowns a quarterback's going to have on the ground. And let's be honest, the further they get into their careers, we've seen it with Cam Newton, the less and less of their coaches want them to be running the ball anyway. This 6.5 number is spot on. Everyone's going to look at it. They're going to look at his first 2 seasons and want to bet the over. It's a total stay away for me. 6.4, 6.5, I think is perfectly fair.
So while Allen was able to start all 16 games last year, Sam Darnold was not. Mono sidelined him for a few games, something you don't see very often. The props for this year, 20 and a half passing touchdowns in terms of passing yards, 3,600, 39 and a half. Joe, where are you headed with this one?
This is such a pathetically low touchdown number, 20 and a half. 20 quarterbacks hit this number last year, including Daniel Jones and Gardner Minshew. I just want to bet the over for hope. We're living in this era right now where the tensions, stress is at an all-time high in this country. I just want to bet the over for hope, but I'm also going to bet the over for based on some reason as well. Like you mentioned, Doug, he missed 3 games last year due to mono. He still had 19 touchdown passes. But look at how Darnold progressed from the first half of the season to the second half of the season. First 6 games he played last year, the Jets were 2-4. He had 7 touchdowns with 9 interceptions. In the last 7 games he played last season, they were 5-2, 12 touchdowns, 4 interceptions. His arsenal isn't outstanding, but you've got some experience with Brashad Perryman and Jamison Crowder. They added Baylor wide receiver Denzel Mims in the second round. It's Darnold's 3rd year in the league. It's his 2nd year in Adam Gase's system. We're not asking for a lot here. I'll play the over 20 and a half touchdowns.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's ditto. I mean, you nailed everything. I like over on both props just because I'm expecting a big leap from Darnold. Now, he was turnover prone at USC. We saw some of that with the Jets, but the job is still his. Like you said, he's more comfortable with Gase. I think he's going to be fine. And I think the Jets are just going to be a lot friskier than that entire division will be better than it has been in recent years. All right, so hopefully Darnold will see more touchdowns this year than ghosts. But let's talk about the number 1 pick from a couple of years ago, Baker Mayfield, 4,000 passing yards as the prop, 23 and a half passing touchdowns. Joe, it's certainly been eventful around Baker Mayfield the last couple of years. He's dangerous, we know that. But which way are you headed on these props?
It's a clean sweep for me tonight. It's going to be 3 overs on 3 questions. I'm going to play over 23 and a half here. I like the addition of Kevin Stefanski as the team's head coach, strictly from an offensive perspective. He was the play caller in Minnesota last year for Kirk Cousins. It was his first year calling the plays. Take a look at what Cousins did. 69% completion percentage. That was 4th best in the NFL. 8.1 yards per attempt. That was tied for the best of his career as a starter. Odell Beckham, Jarvis Landry, Chubb, and Hunt coming out of the backfield. A lot of guys in the arsenal. I'm playing over 23 and a half here, Doug.
Preston, you're high on Mayfield and even the Browns this year a little bit. Why are you passing on these props?
I'm high in the sense that I think the results that we see from the Browns there's a pretty wide gap. Like they could absolutely just, destroy again and, I should say get destroyed again. Or I think there's some upside that's worth betting. So I bet Baker Mayfield at 50-1 to win MVP. Even though on average, I think this prop yardage number is a little bit high. I think the touchdowns is also a tad high. So I wouldn't be betting unders on these. I'm not going to be betting overs either, just because I think, we're talking about variance a lot and trying to capitalize on a really big Browns year. It's the 50-1 shot. Things line up from last year. Look, he faced the 3rd most difficult pass defense in the NFL overall, yet he still had a 19th best QBR in front of guys like Aaron Rodgers, Tom Brady. This year, the Browns project to play the easiest pass defense schedule in the entire league. You talked about Stefanski, great hire versus Kitchens in my period. Last year, he was number 1 in the entire NFL in his completion percentage between times the Browns just passed the ball versus when they did it out of play action. So when they were doing it out of play action, he was elite. And guess what? Stefanski ran the 5th most frequent play action last year in Minnesota. So all these things line up to a positive Baker Mayfield season. Not enough for me to touch the props, but worth a shot at 50-1.
We've seen a lot of guys who get quote unquote embarrassed like that or have such a subpar season really commit themselves. And the dog pound is hoping that continues with Mayfield, the former number 1 overall pick, and these 3rd-year quarterbacks as they essentially entered their 3rd year. All right, that's going to do it for us. Keep it tuned to ESPN.com's Chalk section for much more content with the season just around the corner.
Thanks for watching ESPN on YouTube. For live streaming sports and premium content, subscribe to ESPN+.